You're listening to the new media. You're listening to Mitchell Talks. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at MitchellTalks. It is episode 7 of the News9 sessions. Capitol Chief Aaron Breelback. Good morning, Mr. Breelback.
Good morning, sir.
And AM anchor extraordinaire Grant Herms. This is the first one we've done since the advent of 788.
Yes.
What do we want to talk about? The world on this one? It's crazy.
I was surprised by the margin that this was passed on. I kind of thought it was going to pass, but not by 12 points. I mean, that's a solid win for the Yes campaign. I mean, I figured maybe 1 or 2 points, so we could have a little bit of a back and forth in this maybe not special session that's going to happen, but not double-digit lead.
I'm disagreeing with you. I saw it coming as a double-digit lead. I'm surprised it wasn't even higher than it was. I was guessing it would be 70%.
You thought it would be that high?
Yes.
I think there are still too many conservatives in the state that would have turned out to vote against it. Or a lot of people who didn't want to appear to be against this thing but actually were.
Let me ask you this. The commercials that ran prior to it from the anti-788 people, you did a truth test on it, determined that some of the information was a little bit on the sketchy side. That said, how effective were those commercials leading up to 788 vote?
I don't think, as far as from their standpoint, they sowed enough doubt into the state question. They didn't do a particularly good enough job explaining the fallout, and we'll talk about that in a second. Now, the questions that we're asking that should have been asked prior to the state question, they didn't do a good enough job of bringing those questions up that I think would have forced it the other way.
See, I agree with you to a certain degree, but I don't think that they had to go so far as to bring in the concerns that people have over 788. I look at it as a jury trial. In this case, they were trying to put reasonable doubt in the minds of just enough people.
Sure, and that's... While it would work on a jury, it doesn't work in an up and down yes or no vote.
Right.
It just doesn't.
But I think that there was some impact. I think that they took a couple of points away in the final days because people who were voting, a lot of people that I spoke with, even at the 788 party, said that they had some questions about 788. They still passed it, but I think that it probably took a few points away.
Sure.
And of course, the pro-788 people, this was a, pardon the pun, grassroots effort. So there wasn't a whole lot of money to try to counter those advertisements, but there was a few $1 million put into the campaign against 788.
Do you think that CBS is going to owe Steven Tyler and the guys at Tower some money? Did you see Stephen Colbert's song?
Yes.
You know the Tower,
Oklahoma.
They rolled that out Monday night at Tower. I just wondered if they copyrighted that because
the state owns the rights to the song Oklahoma.
It's true.
But Oklahoma was something that they came up with at Tower, so I don't know. And you know what? I went to that. There wasn't a lot of people there. Bud Scott showed up, who is now, in terms of political consultants, he's 2-0 in races that I know about.
He's not doing bad.
He ain't doing bad. He looks and sounds like, I figured it out, who Bud sounds and looks like. A young Orson Welles. Agree?
You'd mentioned that to me, and I didn't really realize it until you'd said it to me, and I'm like, my God, you're right. He's Orson Welles.
Of course, most everybody knows who Orson Welles is dead, but this guy has got great pipes, number one.
Oh, yeah.
And the other day when we did the deal Monday night, 35,000 people watched that Facebook Live.
Yeah.
35,000 people.
It doesn't surprise me. I had done a Facebook Live with one of my photographers just leading up to 788. And he and I just kind of talked about it, and it was an 8-minute long piece. 10,500 views on this thing.
It's unbelievable.
People were really, and that's why my argument was I really thought that it was going to pass much, much higher than it did even. I thought this thing was just going to go through the stratosphere. And the numbers of people that showed up were just incredible, showed up for the vote. Just incredible.
Let me ask this question, because there's so much intrigue about the election, but the next day, the State Department of Health had their press conference. Tom Bates, the interim, had told what he was going to do, and he's trying to right the ship over there. Best of luck, because that's a culture change. And one of the biggest challenges he has is there's going to be a new governor fairly soon.
And a very largely new legislature.
So this is a job audition for him. So if he does a great job in shaking up the culture over there, that could be great for him down the road. But Eccles was on. It was here at News9 the night of the election. I saw Senator Treat. What I saw were most of these lawmakers saying, we're going to get this done. We're going to get it done, and right away. Did the vote total make them sit up straight and go, we can't mess this up?
I think so. And what you're seeing now also is the governor a couple weeks ago had said pretty firmly that she anticipates having a special session if 788 passes. Now she's really backpedaling away from that. She's saying, maybe we'll do one. We're kind of considering it. And when pressed about it, she says that with so many runoffs, it's going to be difficult bringing the legislature in to do a special session. So politics over policy?
I don't know. That's exactly the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
Exactly the wrong thing to do. But her instincts the last couple of years have not been good on True North.
And let's face it, she's a lame duck governor. She has nothing to lose by trying to make some changes. And she made it pretty specifically clear when we interviewed her the other day that she wants to have at least some type of a listing of what medical ailments will be covered under 788. And both leaders of the House and Senate have said, no, that wasn't the will of the people. That's not something that we're going to support. And that's a smart thing to do because, again, you don't want to go into an election season changing the will of the people. That's not going to go over real well.
So let's look at what happened. The governor is Bill Shepard, our pollster, Southern Poll says, historic low approval. You have Lieutenant Governor is now going to be the former Lieutenant Governor and not going to be the governor.
He's looking for a job.
So champions of the conservative movement, at least until this session for the governor. Mr. Lamb was very clear he wasn't down with what was going on when the governor's policy was moving forward on the tax increases. But several members of the Platform Caucus, well, I'm not even sure we know how many members are in the Platform Caucus, but some of those folks are in trouble, were defeated or in runoffs. That's the ultra-right thing. You had Democrats showing up in numbers. You set a record, basically, in this election.
Right.
For a while, Democrats we were counting the numbers the other night, they were outvoting the Republicans. Some have said, and I contend this is true, that we went a little bit more to the left than to the right. Now, John Eccles and Greg Treat are smart people. They see that trend. You said they're doing the right thing. If there's not a special session, these people that were vociferous about 788 are going to be howling. Agree?
I agree.
And if they have a special session and they don't get done what needs to be done, seen that before. You got runoffs coming in August. Maybe the governor's thinking we can't, maybe her point is the legislature can't get it done in time. But if those people that showed up at the primary vote who hadn't been there in a long time show up in the runoffs and in November,
yep.
I mean, you've opened a Pandora's box, and the Republicans could really get hurt.
And we both know perception is reality when it comes to voters. So voters are already, let's say, disenfranchised. They're not real pleased with the fact that we've had 3 special sessions to fix budget issues and to try to reach some type of a budget agreement. We had a very, very public teacher walkout. We all know exactly what that looked like. Voters aren't real happy with the way the government is being run right now. So do we have another special session that's going to cost that much more money after the legislature left 3 weeks early? Do we have another special session to try to make changes to the will of the people? Politically, how's that going to pan out for the Republicans?
If there are changes at all, I mean, there could be a way that they have to implement this to make it work properly, right? I mean, there are a lot of holes in some of this, a lot of the bureaucratic back and forth that's going to happen between all these agencies that we just don't have worked out yet. I don't understand how she couldn't call the special session, and it also may be politically driven.
Right. Well, that's kind of what we were just talking about. It probably is, but if we pass it with the regulations that are currently in place with the wording of 788, that doesn't necessarily need any type of legislative action. You could arguably do that with just the agencies that are involved, agreeing, and off it goes. And I suspect that might be, especially after talking with the governor, that might be the way that's going to go. She seemed very cool to the idea of having a special session when we talked with her the other day. Definitely changed her tone dramatically. And again, do the Republicans want another special session where they're butting heads very publicly with each other leading into this general election?
Well, she got involved by saying there was going to be one the last week of the session. Perhaps if she's changed her mind, what's the old adage about carpenters? Measure twice, cut once.
Right.
When she rolled out, we're going to have a special session if this passes, and they don't have one. Look, Bud Scott could become a very powerful political force, not just about State Question 788, but just about dysfunction at the Capitol. Someone like him, somebody like Bud, gets out there and goes, wait a minute, they're welching on everything they said they were going to do, including a special session. And I can read between the lines of what you're saying. So people probably got to the governor and said, look, if we go out there and we have a dysfunctional food fight straight out of Animal House for 2 or 3 weeks in the summertime just before the runoffs, holy Moses, Drew Edmondson will be in there measuring the drapes. So many times you just see politicians that are getting out, their mouths are writing checks that they can't cash. So the people, what was the vote total on how many people voted for a State Question 788?
I don't know off the top of my head, but the voter turnout overall was close to double what it was in 2014.
Right. And somebody starts screaming about they're going backwards on this. That's a lot of people who are amped up right now. And you see where we're going with this?
It's also, that same idea that if she calls this, it continues this issue that turned out voters, and specifically Democrats, to an amount that we haven't seen in quite a while, and it keeps them active into November, through the runoffs, and into the general. That's a long time from now, and I don't think the Republicans want that.
That's a very, very good point. And when we think about it, if she does call a special session, how effective will it really be? When you've got so many legislators who are facing runoffs, when you've got legislators who are leaving, Senator Irvin Yen, for example, do you think he's even going to show up for a special session on this? He's on his way out the door. He was vehemently opposed to medicinal marijuana to begin with, let alone recreational marijuana. You think this guy's even going to show up for work?
Well, it's not a good thing. And I think Republicans thought they'd outsmarted everybody by putting this on the primary ballot. You wake up the next morning and you go, I need to chew my leg off, politically speaking here, because it's one of these really bad situations where that they have got to hit everything right on the head perfectly. Otherwise, people start reevaluating and you start making some noise because we got this ginormous primary.
Right, but if
everybody's on the ballot.
If it's going to be on, it's still better to have it on for the primary than for the general as far as the Republicans are concerned.
And we'll still see if they can't turn it around. Let's say the rollout of this is botched, it's bungled, it gets messy and sloppy, and there's issues that fall through the cracks during this whole thing between bureaucracies, or they can't hire enough people, they can't pay the people, whatever it is. The Republicans could have a strategy to turn it around and say, are these the kind of people you want running the state that allowed this to happen? That's not an outlandish thought on a way to run these campaigns come November.
And John Eccles and Greg Treat, they're already getting in front of this. They're the ones who are saying, no, we're not going to be changing the will of the people. We're going to be trying to implement this as smooth as possible. Politically, you're right. They're doing the smart thing right now by saying we're not going to change the will of the people. But can the governor stand in the way of that? Can they, if it does come to a special session and they pass certain legislation just to regulate the licenses and get the licensing done in a way that's most efficient, can she veto whatever they do and say, no, I want a list of specific ailments that are under the heading of this?
The other thing, too, is that does she have the political capital left to do this? There's not a lot of time left for Governor Mary Fallin. We can get to it later, but I'll argue that the reason Todd Lamb did not make it to this runoff is because of his closeness to Fallin. She is not well liked in this state. So I don't know if she even has the pull to do something like that.
Right. And keep in mind, this is the same governor that went on to the floor during the debate over the budget and still wasn't able to sway a single legislator. So did she have the political capital then? No. And as a lame duck governor, does she carry any political capital now? I'd argue probably not. Right. And then we take a look at some of the gubernatorial races. Who did she endorse again?
Exactly.
And who wanted her endorsement? Exactly.
A name that came out of the other night, a winner while losing. The name, Angela Bonilla.
Yeah. I was very impressed with the way that she conducted herself during this debate. This was the debate for Attorney General, which, as we know, has become a very ugly, nasty debate. Nondoc.com held a debate. I was one of the reporters posing the questions. First thing that impressed me was these guys were much more civil towards each other than they have been in their commercials. And I think that both of their campaigns had talked with them and said, hey, Gettner Drummond, hey, Hunter, tone it down just a little bit, all right? And that probably worked to their advantage. But I think she did well.
17 points. Don't you know that she's getting lots of invitations for meetings with nice lunches and stuff?
You know
I'm sure
17
she is.
points.
You know it.
And her background as a public defender, she showed up well. She could be what we call it, a queen maker.
Yeah.
Not a king maker in this situation. Also, just virtually everybody down ballot is in a runoff except for Glenn Mulready.
Right.
Who's probably going to win that in November. But are you surprised at how many of these folks, even the superintendent of public instruction?
Yeah.
Just amazing to me how many of these down ballot races are going to runoffs. You know what? Maybe the first time in history we'll see real close examination of what they're doing. Because I'm going to tell you, and you were at the debate with the SAI folks, State Auditor Inspector, that thing was left hanging. There's a dozen stories left in that.
Absolutely.
The Costello-Osborne story, a dozen stories left hanging on that one. I mean, Leslie, from the ads and from the appearances, she was running for labor commissioner, and Kathy was running for mental health commissioner. When you listen to what are their headlines, right? Joy Hoffmeister not making it without a runoff, and then the Drummond and the Hunter thing. And that's about that opioid lawsuit. You were one of the panelists. You saw that's going to be front and center.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me ask you this, though. I mean, there were a lot of voters who I would argue were single-issue voters. They were voting for 788. Is it possible that a lot of them were just either randomly pulling the lever for other people, or they were pulling the lever for people who they were familiar with their names, weren't happy with their names because of all the mud that's being slung about? Is it possible that had an impact, and that when it comes time for a runoff, there's going to be a much, much bigger difference?
I would say I think part of that is true. I think part of that we can't know, but the part that I think is true is that a lot of these folks were voting because of 788, and then were voting for the change candidate, knew the name, and then voted for the name that they didn't recognize because they didn't want to keep voting for the name that they knew. I also think that the runoffs are kind of a testament to engagement and turnout in part. And maybe this will carry into August and then into November, maybe, if the parties and the voters can keep themselves engaged more. But we have seen an uptick in engagement that's been outside of 788. It's obviously propelled it to a new height. But I think some of this is just increased voter engagement overall.
But a lot of this is going to wane off too now that 788's passed.
Absolutely. So we'll see what these campaigns do now, if anything, to continue bringing these people to the polls.
And I think, honestly, a lot of it falls in the governor's court again. What she does in terms of a special session, if anything at all, I think is going to play a very big role in November.
Do you think that education will take the place of 788 when we hit the runoffs, when we hit the general election? It's obviously beneficial for the Republican Party to be quieter going forward now, even into the runoffs. Do you think that they'll have to find another issue to make noise about? And do you think that's going to be education again?
I doubt it's going to be education because they didn't fare well in that last battle. My thought is that what they're probably going to do is a distraction, and they're going to focus more on either mental health or criminal justice.
Or I just saw this too, but government spending. or government problems spending in state government.
And they've already focused on that. Part of the problem with that is that it may not be as bad as we think that it is. And every gubernatorial candidate so far has called for across the board audits. Audits, we need audits. But what if it turns out that it's not as bad as we think it is?
Right. Which we do, by the way. We should say that we do audits of every agency every year. There's a statewide audit that comes out every year of each agency. Are they investigative audits of each individual agency that comes out separately? No, but there is a statewide governmental audit every year.
Right. And what people I think are calling for is more of a forensic audit, more of we really want to look into the books, not just what you're handing us to look at, but we want to look at your real books. And that's part of the problem. I mean, it's easy to audit the books that I hand you because everything is going to balance. And part of the problem is that we have a law that says that if you're an agency, the state auditor can't come in and just randomly audit you. You have to be called in either by the governor or by both heads of the Senate and the House working together, or by the agency head. Now, if I'm an agency head and I'm intentionally misspending money or forming a slush fund like the health department did, am I going to go to Gary Jones and say, hey, I'd like you to audit me and potentially put me in jail? Of course not. But as a result of that, we don't know how bad the problem is. So is that something that the Republicans could potentially latch on to? Yeah, I think so. But my suspicion is they're going to be focusing much more on criminal justice reform, because I think that's something that's much more tangible. It impacts everybody. And if they toss into that also mental health, there's not a single person that you don't know in the state of Oklahoma that isn't in some way impacted by mental health crisis.
Yeah.
Or maybe, addiction too. Throw that in there.
The top job, you kind of bring that one up. It's Oklahoma City versus Tulsa. Let's handicap that for just a moment. Todd Lamb is out. I don't know of any scenario. I mean, I heard a couple, but I don't know of many scenarios that had Todd Lamb being not one of the top two because of his strength in the rural areas. Was this the election that just told rural Oklahoma you just don't matter as much as you used to, and the influence has been going down?
It has been going down. I think obviously that narrative stops as of midnight on Wednesday morning, because now their vote matters a lot. Now it comes down to who votes for who in the rural parts of the state, and who can convince the rural voters that they're one of them, that they have their concerns in mind. Is it going to be the shady mortgage lender, or is it going to be the city urban only mayor? That's a difficult pick for someone living out in Woodward County, in Beaver County. They probably just don't know who to pick at this point, which is why they voted for Todd Lamb.
Right. And you're right. I mean, they're going to be looking at, we've got a couple of city boys. But at the same time, I think that Todd Lamb is out in part because even though he tried to distance himself from the governor, he's still part of the establishment. He's still part of the problem. In 8 years, what has he really accomplished as lieutenant governor?
And I'm not sure that rural voters even vote that way. There's a lot of work that's been done that they vote out of spite in general against urban areas, because they see their tax dollars going to a much greater extent to those urban areas, which is true. That's where more of the people are. But then they don't feel like they're getting the returns on their taxes, and so they vote out of spite against those things, in the same way that they would vote against Todd Lamb for being the in candidate, and they're voting for the out. So we'll see who ends up where on that spectrum between Cornett and Stitt.
Right.
It's interesting that Todd Lamb lost Garfield County, where he grew up. Interesting changes going on here. I'm looking through Dr. Gaddy's tweets. There are all of these rules that the political scientists have about runoffs. Here's a couple of them. So, by the way, Lieutenant Governor Lamb tied himself to Donald Trump. Remember that? You're tied to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's great in Oklahoma. I'm sure the numbers are still good. He ran as an outsider. The people didn't look at it that way.
People were buying it.
Lamb is the only Oklahoma lieutenant governor to ever seek the governorship and not win his party's nomination.
I didn't realize that, really.
The only one?
Wow.
That's what he says.
Wow.
This is more Gaddy, where he says that he is only one of 3 lieutenant governors to try and move to another elected office and fail: Jack Mildren and Bobby Carey III. So, and there are all these numbers about what needs to happen in the primary. Let's talk about media coverage of this. and we're seeing like some media expand in Oklahoma, some media go downhill. But for the runoff rather, how do you think Oklahomans are going to? How do you think they're going to want their news delivered? We've not had a runoff like this before, in my knowledge, where you have all of these down ballot races and a lot of legislative races and runoffs.
That's going to be on us in the media to make sure that we're keeping up and delivering this information. Usually runoffs tend to kind of take a back seat. They're not as exciting as the primaries are, and they won't be as exciting as these recent primaries were. So that'll kind of be on us to make sure that our frame for this stays constant, that these runoffs are as important as other stories that we could get lost in. I think a lot of it, too, will happen on Facebook. You saw a lot from those educators on Facebook who were really polling hard and pushing each other to get to the polls and make their way, to get their voters out to vote the candidates in that they wanted. So I think a lot of that will also happen on Facebook, and the most engaged people will stay engaged.
I was showing, as you were talking, I was showing Aaron my new front page of MitchellTalks.com. There are a lot of people in my life who would think that would never be one of the first tabs you see on my website, which is a great big green marijuana leaf that says State Question 788. And then the second tab that just went up last night, the runoffs. Because a lot of people like me were going, hey, we'll come back 1st of August and we'll start covering politics again. Man, it's going to happen a lot sooner than that.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think it's going to stop between now and then.
Who has money left to run these runoffs?
Well, where does Todd Lamb's money go from here?
How much did he have left over?
I'm sure he had a few bucks.
He's got a couple zombie campaigns out there, too, that just still have some money hanging around from previous years. So I'm assuming it's going to end up like that again. And maybe he slides money to someone's campaign. Maybe he doesn't with that. I don't know.
How is it going to be delivered? You mentioned it's on us. That we're in uncharted territory. Is this going to be the next phase of, you mentioned it just a moment ago, Mr. Breelbeck, you did 10,000 people on a Facebook Live the other day?
Just sitting there in the car talking with my photographer for 8 minutes, talking about who may or may not be coming out for the vote. Just a couple of guys sitting there chit-chatting, basically, and we wound up having a bet over lunch whether it'd pass or not pass. By the way, Joby owes me lunch. But yeah, we just having a discussion, 10,500 viewers. That's amazing.
I think this will happen on social media. It'll happen on Facebook. It'll happen on Twitter. That's what I've been talking about before, but like the more concentrated voters are in those places, and they'll seek out those places. You're not going to get it from your diffuse voter who maybe scans a front page, maybe opens below the fold, maybe catches a B block or a half of an A block in a newscast. It's not going to be those folks driving this into the runoffs. That
said, though, we do still have a lot of rural voters who listen and watch the old-fashioned way. They turn on the radio, they read the newspaper, the physical newspaper, and they watch the TV. So we've got to juggle both.
And the old media editorialized against 788 big time. You just wonder if it's not the last dying quiver of the old legacy media.
Now, what I have noticed, though, a lot of conservatives are on board with 788. People who you would normally think would be very anti-788 are on board with it. I think we talked a bit about this last week in terms of even the staunchest conservative has seen a loved one suffer through cancer. Even the staunchest conservative probably in high school smoked a little bit of grass and didn't eat somebody's face off. So I think there's a shift. A lot of the people who even 5 years ago would have said, a bunch of stoners and deadheads are now saying, you know what, there might be something to this. And the more that we're learning about medicinal marijuana and the effects that it has, and it seems like every day we're learning something else, not just about how it can bring down swelling and inflammation, but how now we're finding out that it could possibly help out with Alzheimer's. That's huge. How many of us haven't been impacted by Alzheimer's in one way or another? So I think a lot of folks who lean more conservative are starting to say, hey, there might be something to this.
There was another group of losers from Tuesday night, and Scott, you said it.
It's a nice way to phrase it.
Yeah.
A bunch of losers.
Another bunch of losers.
They're such losers.
Well, the haters. But Scott, you said it in our coverage on Tuesday night that Oklahoma got a little more blue, if not a little purple, after this election. And the folks who lost were the solid Oklahoma bloc of Christian conservatives, the Oklahoma Baptists.
Platform Caucus.
Yes, the Platform Caucus. They lost, the dry counties went wet. They lost prohibition completely in the state. 788 passed. Todd Lamb passed. He was their pallbearer for this entire thing. A lot of the other solidly Christian candidates who ran on those platforms either are in runoffs or didn't make it back into office. And that's, to me, fascinating, especially in the buckle of the Bible Belt.
I can't disagree with that. I think we're seeing a shift, but I don't think that it's necessarily a shift purple. I just think that those who are red are remaining red, but I think that red is changing. I think it's still going to be a Republican-controlled state. I think it will be for quite some time, but I think that Republican attitudes are changing.
What's coming up for you guys this week? Next week, what does the future reporting look like, at least for the next 7 days?
I will be reporting on the pitcher of beer I'll be drinking in Wisconsin. I'm on vacation next week, so this will be very nice.
Why Wisconsin?
I went to school in Wisconsin. I went to Madison. We've got a wedding up there, so I'm going up to see one of my friends get hitched.
I spent a lot of time in Madison. Madison is a really cool city.
It's a fun town. It is a fun town.
You go to Freak Fest at all?
I was there a couple times. We did that a couple years. After that, it wears on you. Once or twice you go, you get the idea. It's a big street Halloween party.
Freak Fest is the world's biggest Halloween party.
Yes.
You've got thousands of people that flood into the streets wearing costumes. And if you get a chance, Google Freak Fest. And it's just the pictures you see are pretty amazing. It's a lot of college kids, but a lot of townies, too.
It's fun. It's 30 degrees, but it's fun.
It's 30 degrees, and people don't dress like it's 30 degrees.
Do you think we could get some Facebook Live from you, Mr. Herms, when you're back? Because if we could show people a little bit about medicine, people have heart attacks here, it'd be it's a different part of the world.
It really is.
Madison is a pretty liberal city too, so
in a generally pretty red state.
Right.
Yeah, Madison is like the Berkeley of the Midwest, I guess, as some people have lovingly called it in their lives.
But it's also green and gold country, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
You know, I have one share of Packer stock.
It's worth it.
And I have been invited to the shareholders. We've never been. Candace is going, we should go this year. It's the 100th anniversary. They started out as the Acme Packers, but there is a possibility that might happen. So, all right. Well, that's and brats and beer.
And lots of brats, lots of cheese.
So you're off next week.
I'm off next week. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll have to figure out what we're going to do, Mr. Brillbeck. Your week coming up.
I'll be off next Friday. I'm also taking a little vacation time after the 4th of July holiday.
And we're headed to 10,000 feet for a week here, our old residence of Angel Fire, New Mexico, where there are hummingbirds and little noise. So thank you very much. If we want to know more about Grant Herms and his trip to the Berkeley of Wisconsin, the Cheesehead State, how do we follow you?
Grant Herms, KWTV on Facebook. Same thing on Twitter. Instagram is Grant Herms TV.
Ditto, just follow me on Facebook. That's where I'm most active.
And that was Aaron Brillbeck and Grant Herms and Jovi. You have been served. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again real soon.
You're listening to the new media, the Mitchell Talks Network. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter @MitchellTalks.